Welcome back to another edition of the Routine Jumper Podcast, the podcast where we discuss everything NBA basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we're going to be doing things differently. Nico Harrison is out as the GM for the Dallas Mavericks. It's been the talk of the town for the last 24 hours, and rightfully so. This is the man who traded Luka Dončić to the purple and gold, to the Los Angeles Lakers. And after a rough start to this season, despite getting Cooper flagged #1 overall in the most recent NBA draft, this team does not look like the team that Nico Harrison envisioned. And I think the new owners caught on to where all the fans were at months ago, which is that this guy gotta go. So now, with Nico getting the boot, already posting unemployed on his Instagram profile, and setting up the Dallas Mavericks for what might be a really interesting rebuild and retooling around Cooper flag, the question now is, how can we make sense of everything that's happened? What happened? How we got here? There's some on the fence about how this whole situation was terrible from the get-go. You have other people who actually believe that Nico Harrison did the right thing and believe that now him being fired is just him being utilized as the scapegoat for an even bigger issue, is that the owners were the ones that signed off on the Luka Dončić trade. But you can't kick an owner out, right? They're the ones who paid for the team. And then last but not least, I want to focus on what the Mavericks do now, right? After figuring out how we got here, where they're at now, and getting an understanding of both sides of the coin, what do they do next? So what we're going to do is, in today's podcast, we're going to do something different by reacting to three different videos that I haven't watched, but all from people that I think are really interesting voices within the NBA space to kind of give us a good understanding of all of the different wavering opinions within this conversation around a Dallas Mavericks team that is kind of barely floating above water right now. And some would say I'm even being nice in that case. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with my boy Low. Legend of Winning, a.k.a. one of the biggest Lakers fans on YouTube. Somebody who was one of the biggest proponents of this Luka trade after it happened, saying that not only is Nico Harrison an idiot, but you have now put together one of the best next 5-year potential runs that we have in the NBA by having Luka Dončić in this kind of market with the potential to build something around him post LeBron James. So first, we're going to start out with what Low has to say about the Nico Harrison firing. And from my understanding, from what I did read in the description and kind of like a little peek of what he did already say, gives us a pretty good timeline and understanding of how we even got here. So let's start there first.
So, it's finally happened. After just 9 short months removed from the infamous Luka Dončić trade, general manager Nico Harrison has been fired. Now, for many people like myself, this ain't that much of a surprise. We already knew that trading Luka Dončić had the potential to go down as one of, if not the worst trades in NBA history. It makes absolutely positively no sense to trade your 25-year-old superstar for a 30-year-old, especially when the 30-year-old is not just injury prone, but the 25-year-old is already better than the 30-year-old. It literally makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Let's start there. Luka Dončić for Anthony Davis alone didn't make sense, just logistically speaking. From an age perspective, Luka Dončić for AD didn't make any sense. It made no sense at all. And now you have to ask yourself, as the Dallas Mavericks, when you look at which trade chip would have been better long term, if you were really to run this back and think about just value alone, Anthony Davis, if you were to go into a 2K trade sim right now and try to do what Nico Harrison did those months ago, there's no way. It would be just as big of a fleece in 2K as it was in real life, because it was one of those things that you just didn't think was humanly possible to pull off. Practically 1 for 1. No disrespect to Max Christie, but practically 1 for 1. It just doesn't make any sense.
But hey, that's the world that we live in. Now, unfortunately, there was some people in the community that believe that maybe, just maybe, I want to be different and say that Dallas actually won the trade. Or maybe it's even-handed, but I understand why it makes sense to trade Luka for AD. Because when everyone is healthy and ready to go, Dallas is a real title contending team. So because of the different people in the community, as well as Nico Harrison and the rest of the decision makers out in Dallas, we had to sit back and wait for the inevitable. We had to wait to see how undeniable it would be that this was a massive mistake before we came to this conclusion. And I'm here to tell you, the only surprise out of all of this is how quickly we came to this resolution.
That's a great point. Honestly, I think the biggest thing for everybody was just the mere fact that if you thought that the leash was short to begin with, like going into the season, like the expectations were already skewed coming into the year. Klay Thompson wasn't having a strong season last year. Kyrie Irving comes into the year with the torn ACL. The understanding is Jason Kidd knows that this is a potential season-long lasting injury, but is already dropping around sprinkles of the idea of Kyrie Irving coming back within the beginning portion of 2026, somewhere around January. Like, you're playing Cooper Flag at point guard. You're positioning yourself in a way where, with the way the season started coming into the year, it was almost a clear indication that this team was going to go through some growing pains, just given the fact that they were limping into the year. Not to mention Anthony Davis with his injury situation, Derek Lively's missed time, Daniel Gafford's missed time. You brought in D'Angelo Russell trying to make some kind of discount version of the Los Angeles Lakers, but pairing him back with AD, and he hasn't even shown Jason Kidd enough to start at PG. That's why that Cooper Flag experiment has been what it's been. And here we are, essentially, what, less than a full month or just about a full month into the NBA season, and you already are giving up. You're admitting defeat around the situation. You're admitting your faults of allowing things to get to this point before anything has really set itself up to prove you right or prove you wrong, essentially.
Not know that it was going to be this bad this quickly. We just made a video about the Dallas Mavericks like 7-10 days ago on this channel, and since then, not only is there even more news, but it somehow has gotten significantly worse. It's crazy bad. But before we do that, again, let's just briefly go over what happened over the last 9 months, because there's a lot to unpack, especially because there's even more information that has happened over the past 10 days. As we all know, February 2nd, early this year, the trade is official.
Shout out to the Utah Jazz for just being an innocent bystander. You didn't ref the situation. You didn't try to negotiate or haggle to see if you could get more from anybody within a trade where it seemed like everybody was getting, quote unquote, a good deal out of the mix. No. Utah Jazz, just great mediators in the mix, just allowing themselves to get a quote unquote young talent and 2 second-round picks that should be relatively high or like early within the second round. Nothing crazy for the Jazz, but again, shout out to them for just sitting there and innocently allowing themselves to gain some kind of package of any sort to help facilitate this without having to actually be a part of the overall debate, which is, wow, you traded Luka Dončić for Anthony Davis.
Luka Dončić is now being moved to the Los Angeles Lakers, and in return, the Dallas Mavericks receive Anthony Davis, Max Christie, and a first-round pick. Now, the first thing that is very important to remember and make sure that people do not try to rewrite history is that both Luka and AD at that time were dealing with availability problems. For whatever reason, people are attempting to rewrite history and make it seem as if like Luka was the only one that wasn't available. No. Anthony Davis started off the season really strong, but quickly fell off. Some of that had to do with the fact that he just wasn't knocking down his shots, but also injuries and being 100% is also playing a part in it as well. However, Nico Harrison and the rest of the decision makers out in Dallas, and that's also very important to highlight as well, because for whatever reason, people are trying to make it seem as if like Nico Harrison was the only one who was on board with trading Luka. Nico, a general manager, cannot be the only one on board making this decision. So it's important to highlight that ownership was a part of this as well, and I'm not going to allow them to just weasel their way out of it. So both.
I think that's a great point by itself too. And I mentioned it at the top of the pod that I feel like something that can't just be bypassed in all of this is the fact that this is a decision that when you make it as a collective group, the idea of trying to scapegoat Nico Harrison completely for this is terrible PR to a certain extent. Because again, this is the kind of move when you think about a franchise caliber player, right? This is a guy who is the face of your franchise, a cornerstone of what the Mavericks were supposed to be for the next decade plus. That's not something that you just do as a GM off the strength of a good hunch or something that just really feels like a great, swing play as a team that's on the precipice of something and needs to make a big shakeup. You don't make that decision solo dolo. You make that decision with ownership. You make that decision with the coaching staff. This is something that you essentially got to get cleared like TSA. You have to run this through the proper channels. And I know that there's a lot of conversation around the fact that the new Dallas Mavericks owners are not really basketball people. They're not really within the conversation of having a background in basketball fandom and things of that nature. They come from more of a business casino background, and maybe it was easier for someone like Nico Harrison to sell them on said dream of the defense wins championships and leaning into a well-established former champion in Anthony Davis to pair with Kyrie Irving and have this team that's like, built to, better defense. It's so weird to say that they were going to be this elite level defensive team adding Anthony Davis when they had Luka Dončić going into the postseason. They were a top 5 defense. So I don't necessarily even know what the sales pitch for Nico Harrison to this ownership group was, but to allow ownership to simply put all of the onus on Nico Harrison. Again, someone has to be the scapegoat in order to find some semblance of rapport back with the fan base, because he lost a lot of people with the Luka Dončić trade. They lost a lot of people. There was a handful of people that may have felt a little bit more comfortable coming back once the Cooper Flag thing happened. But with the start to this season, people are teeter-tottering back and forth as far as whether or not this is even their favorite team anymore. And so it's hard to absolve Nico Harrison of any wrongdoing in this, because to even bring the idea to the feet of the owners is already crazy. But then for the owners, even if you have no background in basketball, Google Luka Dončić. Google him and you'll understand what he means to that, what he means, or I guess what he meant to that Dallas Mavericks franchise. And you would have had the wherewithal to say no, which makes it a really big question as to what could have possibly made them green like this.
Both Nico and ownership and Patrick Dumont tries to come out and justify the trade by claiming that defense wins championships. And we need players that's going to come in and take this serious, especially on the defensive side of the floor. And that's not Luka.
Meet Gym Monster 2. Your all-in-one smart home gym. Set it up anywhere, no limits, no installation.
Ownership backs Nico Harrison's claims, and then now we're off to a bunch of slandering of Luka Dončić. Be very mindful that this is an organization that just was a year removed from making a finals appearance, an organization that was just 2 games removed from actually winning a championship. But now, out of the blue, it's gotten so bad out in Dallas that they can't even fathom how they're going to be able to win a championship with Luka. That's how they're pitching it. That's how they were phrasing it. So much so that more and more information and news starts getting leaked out about how much of a degenerate Luka was with his time with the Mavericks. And now people are now backing this idea. Oh, if he was that bad, well, I guess it makes sense to trade him. Now, of course, you already know how I felt about it. Luka could have been doing anything he wanted to out in Dallas, and he still should have stayed on the team. Luka could have been smoking crack. I just would have had a crackhead on my roster and gave him a supermax contract because he is that good of a ball player. However, Nico Harris deemed otherwise.
Do we all agree in the comment section down below? Luka Dončić, even if he's doing crack, he's been that elite through the first portion of the season, through the first portion of his career, that, hey, you give the man a supermax contract happily. You tell yourself that as long as he's good to play 82 games or at least 75 games a season, he's good to go. Hey, man.
So, as this is happening and everyone is panicking, it's also very important to acknowledge as well, Nico Harrison decides to trade Quentin Grimes to the Philadelphia 76ers because he believes he doesn't have the capability of paying him in the upcoming offseason. That's important to acknowledge, especially because of where we are today with Dallas. Nevertheless, fast forward a few more games and Anthony Davis finally makes his Dallas Mavericks debut, and it's the entire Anthony Davis experience. He comes out there, he's dominating, blocking shots, grabbing rebounds, scoring points, yelling to the crowd, playing into this idea that AD is here. The new era has started, and I am now the face of the franchise, and I will not let my Dallas Mavericks fans down. But unfortunately, as I said, it's the full Anthony Davis experience. So in that exact same game when he makes his debut, AD injures himself and effectively is now sidelined for the remainder of the season. Yikes.
Yikes indeed, bro. Yikes indeed. I think that's the craziest part. That's the craziest part when you look back at the whole situation and you have to ask yourself, what factors do Anthony Davis bring with him from the Los Angeles Lakers, right? When you make a trade like this, you have to ask yourself both what the pros and the cons are. Sure, potential double-double machine, DPOY candidate, somebody who can be a number 2 option, legit number 2 option for you on a championship caliber team. But what comes with that? Well, averaging around 55 games a season, that's what comes with it. Missing significant time in the early portion of the year when you're trying to get your team established and try to create some kind of internal chemistry, that comes with it. Someone who constantly re-aggravates issues where it causes him to miss stretches within the season where even if the team is able to put together good winning streaks, they start to fall apart because they can't seem to keep the cohesion. Like, these are different things that come to mind with the, as Lo mentioned, the Anthony Davis experience. It's a situation where you walk into a superstar situation, and if you know everything that you know about him, the devil you know is the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And I would say the devil you knew definitively was Luka Dončić, who was already in your locker room. The devil you don't is how all of those factors I just mentioned are going to play out once he gets to your locker room. You don't know. And I feel as though even if you wanted to go the optimistic route of saying, well, once he gets within our facility and once he gets revitalized and once he works with our trainers, he has a chance to be much more healthy than years past. And so, okay, cool. Okay, cool. It sounds good. It sounds good when you say it, but you can't guarantee that. You could guarantee 27, 7, and 8 from Luka. You could guarantee that. You could guarantee 60-plus games on a season-to-season basis. Qualification for All-NBA on a season-to-season basis for Luka Dončić. Can you do that with Anthony Davis? Can you? I genuinely don't. I genuinely don't know. And I think this early portion of the season kind of proves that the answer is no. No, you can't.
Now, fast forward a few more games, and Kyrie Irving also injures himself as well. ACL injury, which means that he's going to be sidelined for effectively an entire calendar year. And because it's an ACL injury, and because Kyrie is over the age of 30, there is no promise on the caliber of player that he's going to look like when he comes back. Yikes. Then Daniel Gafford also gets hurt as well, and a team that may have been on the brink of competing for a play-in spot unfortunately fell out of that race and finished the season with a record of 39-43. Now, while this is happening, it's also very important to note that Luka, playing for the Lakers, started off a little rough, certainly wasn't 100%, and definitely reflected in the points that he was recording at that time, but quickly got back in rhythm and started dominating in ways that reminded everyone that we are talking about a top 5 player in the NBA. The Lakers, unlike
and somehow looks even better now than he did last season, both physically in terms of what he was able to do in terms of getting in shape, totally spiteful to the Dallas Mavericks, I might add. But statistically, my boy's averaging 40 right now. I mean, bro,
The Mavericks end up making the playoffs. The Lakers finish the season with 50 wins, third best record in the Western Conference, and an actual playoff appearance. Albeit a first-round exit, but more success than we saw on the Mavericks side of things. Now, while this is occurring and unraveling, people still kind of question, hey, Nico, are you sure you still believe that this is going to work out? Nico, while all these things are unraveling, decides to give himself a timetable of only 2 to 3 years, one of the years being last season. Why he did that, I do not know. It makes absolutely positively no sense whatsoever, but he gave himself a 2 to 3 year window. Yikes. Now over the offseason,
gotta go full cam for this one. I mean, terrible decision. Terrible decision. Not only did you put yourself in a bind by making the decision to move off of Luka Dončić as is, which creates a rift between what the fan base feels, what management feels, what ownership feels, what the coach feels in Jason Kidd, what the roster feels around him by making a move like that. But now you've put the pressure on them to essentially put their money where your mouth is. Pause. This is a situation where now these guys have to live up to the expectations of circumstances, of issues that you brought to their doorstep, that you brought to them, expecting them and their play on the floor to bail you out. And the Cooper Flag acquisition was one of the most conspiracy theory based situations in terms of helping bail you out within the next 3 to 5 years. Because it looked like an opportunity for the league to essentially pay him back for making such a bonehead decision, basically in 4K, to not only kind of help extend the relevance of the Los Angeles Lakers, given the fact that LeBron James is due to leave, due to retirement. I don't want to say at any time, because it seems like the dude just he doesn't plan on quitting basketball anytime soon. But he's somebody that eventually you have to build beyond, right? So with the Dallas Mavericks doing what they're doing, you now have, you have this building piece in Cooper Flag. But even as a quote unquote like high level, high commodity player prospect coming out of college, now you just put so much pressure on him to do now 3 different things. Be the face of the franchise. Be the face of the franchise that took the baton from Luka Dončić, and be good enough to turn this team around post making an NBA Finals just 2 seasons prior with Luka Dončić into getting right back into that same spot, but getting the job done. If you want to talk about setting up a young player for failure early and often, like hilariously enough, Anthony Davis has a lot of parallels to this as well. But if you want to talk about setting up a young player for failure from the very opening tip, maybe not even then, from the very first press conference, Cooper Flag was done dirty from the very minute he was drafted. You got handed the baton from Luka Dončić forcefully. You got put in a position where now you are being asked to be the second or third best player on a team that needs to be making postseason runs over the next 3 to 5 years to just even barely validate what Nico Harrison did within this trade. And then more so than ever, if you don't win a championship, that will become so much more defining, because it'll be you versus Luka in comparison for Lord knows how long. For the longest, we always had that tug-of-war battle back and forth, which always tended to lean towards Luka Dončić, of the comparisons between Dončić and Trae Young, because they were essentially traded for each other on draft night, and how different things could look if Luka Dončić went to Atlanta, and how different things would have looked if Trae Young ended up in Dallas, and so on and so forth. Guess what? Trae Young has lost his spot in that conversation as the person that gets kicked while he's down in these kind of comparisons. The new poster child for the Luka Dončić comparison train is Cooper Flag. And the terrible part about it is that even if he finds a way to be an all-star, all-NBA caliber player, his success will always be tied to what it is that Luka Dončić is doing over in Los Angeles. And that sucks for him.
A few things occur as well. the basketball gods, for whatever reason, decide to just answer all the prayers in Dallas, and the Mavericks end up winning the lottery, the number 1 overall pick in the draft class that features Cooper Flag. So Dallas obviously decides to select Cooper Flag with that pick, and Nico Harrison continues to just talk his way into some of the biggest blunders, sat there and said, hey man, I hope you see the vision now. Hope you see the vision now. Of course, many people then assume, are you insinuating that you were told to trade Luka Dončić because you would then be rewarded with the first overall pick, because that's what it sounds like? Or maybe you're just a bumbling fool, a numbskull, who really believes that you winning the lottery was somehow a part of your big plan, despite the fact that you told us that you're supposed to be competing for a championship. Hey, didn't make any sense to me. Still doesn't right now. Now,
Same. Same. Not going to lie to you. We just kind of discussed it a second ago, but that's the thing too, right? Is the justification behind the move. It's one of the reasons why I feel like people have felt so open to pointing the finger at Nico solely rather than lumping him together with ownership, is because it's not, and maybe it's more so because he had to be at the forefront of all of this, because you're not allowed to run and hide. You're not allowed to throw rocks and hide your hands when you make a decision like this. But I think at the same time, the fact that he was openly out in public, doubling down, tripling down on the decision is what makes it even more of a fireable offense down the line when it all kind of blows up in your face, or at least shows signs of not really playing out the way you wanted it to. You got people looking at Nico Harrison in a way that's making him, it's making everything that he did prior with getting guys like Kyrie Irving, making that a solid draft pick of getting Derek Lively, bringing in Daniel Gafford and getting PJ Washington. Like, it makes, that was one of the better collections of trade deadline moves we've seen in terms of trying to help take a team from being middle of the pack, which is where the Dallas Mavericks were at that time. Of course, Luka Dončić still at the helm. Kyrie Irving was in and out of the lineup, but still was relatively healthy, and they just needed a spark. And you make those trades for Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington, and on the surface, you had people questioning whether or not that was enough to really elevate them. And then we see them in the postseason. We see them in the playoffs. PJ Washington is hitting threes like crazy. Some of the biggest corner threes of that postseason came from PJ Washington, including one that ended up helping them in winning that series in the opening round against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Daniel Gafford and the platoon system between him and Derek Lively was major throughout that run. He looked like a genius. He looked like a genius at that trade deadline. In a trade deadline where, although not too much star power truly moved, you piggyback that off of the trade acquisition he made for Kyrie earlier on, before that, coming into the season, and it looked like Nico Harrison was executive of the year and a guy who probably was going to be in contention for it moving forward, because he would hopefully continue to build this contender forward around Luka Dončić the way he had that momentum. And it's like you walked back everything you built rapport-wise as a GM, showing off your skills as an ability to be a team builder. You walk it all back with one move. One singular move cost you all the credibility that over the last 2.5 years alone built you into somebody that people were starting to have real conversations about being one of the better GMs in the NBA. Crazy. We're only going to watch a little bit more of this, and then I have another video we're going to talk about.
Fast forward a few more months, and it is very clear we're now deep into the offseason, and the Mavericks have a glaring hole at the starting point guard position. Kyrie's going to be out for a good portion of the season, if not the entire year. So, of course, the Dallas Mavericks have to address the concern that is left by Luka Dončić. And their answer was D'Angelo Russell. Yes, I'm very much so serious. This was so problematic that heading into the season, two things transpired. A, Jason Kidd, head coach of the Mavericks, had no other choice but to start rookie Cooper Flag at the point guard position, because that's how desperate they were for ball handling and decision making. Starting Cooper Flag at the point guard position. Be very mindful that Cooper Flag is very much so a wing, and you could very well argue at this point in his career would also benefit significantly from a playmaker himself. So the fact that he now has the responsibilities of being the primary decision maker and playmaker for this team screams yikes. But then the second thing that occurred And the irony of it all is that Anthony Davis came into training camp out of shape. Out of shape! He came thick. He came back fat. That's problematic not only because AD, you're injury prone, and as someone who rooted for you when you were with the Lakers, I was highly disappointed in you. I could not believe how unserious you took the offseason. But while that is happening, it's also worth noting on the other side of this trade, Luka Dončić gets in the best shape that he has been in over the past 3 to 4 years. He slims down, he's in front of a magazine, and overall, looks like he is now in position to have a bounce-back season. But wait, it gets worse. Right before the season begins, it's then reported that Daniel Gafford sprained his ankle and will not be available in the beginning of the season. Wowzers. Now, head right into opening night, and you would assume that a team that has a front court of featuring Anthony Davis, PJ Washington, Derek Lively, a team that is supposed to plant their flag defensively, will be able to make a stance against a young, up-and-coming superstar in Victor Wembanyama and get a win over a team that they should be dominant over. Unfortunately, it just doesn't happen. Not only do the Dallas Mavericks lose against the Spurs, but Wemby makes the front court of the Dallas Mavericks look foolish. Play after play, highlight after highlight, it was really tough to watch if you were a Mavericks fan. We talked about this already, so I'm not going to spend that much time on it. But again, and for a team that's supposed to cement themselves as a defensive-oriented roster, especially in their front court, you being just thrown around like a rag doll by Victor Wembanyama, as great as he is crazy. Also, the quick...
So that's the thing too, right? And we discussed that in depth when we talked about the opening night performance for Victor Wembanyama. So I'm not surprised that, you know, when you get to this point, as far as everything with that performance, you look back at that being almost the first straw, the first strike of issues to worry about when it comes to, again, this whole conversation around when we're saying, when you're Nico Harrison and you're saying, hey, we're trying to build a defense wins championships based roster, and you start out like that, regardless of how dominant Victor Wembanyama has the chance of being long term, and he's already been relatively figured out to a certain extent offensively since that game. Like, he's had a handful of standout performances, but teams have had much better time faring against him in recent games, as opposed to when the first portion of the year kicked off, where he absolutely came in and kicked the Mavericks' teeth in. So you ask yourself, as a team that's supposed to be rooted within defense, the very first display you show of your newfound roster fully healthy with anybody, outside of Daniel Gafford, you show that you're not even capable of being that caliber of a team. So if you're not that, and you're historically one of the worst offenses in the NBA, what really are you? What really does make you stand out post Luka Dončić trade? If the answer is nothing, you've also found your answer to why it was a terrible idea to begin with. But the funny part about this is, and shout out to Lo, you guys can watch the rest of his video if you haven't already. I think he goes even more in depth into what it means for the Dallas Mavericks in terms of what they're going to do now that the team is essentially trying to hit the restart button to a certain extent. I don't know exactly what he says, so I'll probably have to watch that on my own as well. But I'm sure that he's going to go into how the Lakers continue to build and thrive with Luka Dončić, who's averaging 40, again, as I've said before, as opposed to the Mavericks, who could be in a real situation of a potential fire sale.